Today, we're checking out some of the coolest horror flicks, sci-fi gems, and mind-bending psychological thrillers that don't have an R rating. We'll list 10 of these awesome movies. Get ready, grab a pen, and write them all down. You'll want to see which ones you can stream for a good time. Number 10. The Gate. The Gate is a supernatural horror flick from 1987, directed by Tibor Takacs and featuring Stephen Dorff in his first-ever movie role. The story revolves around two young boys who unintentionally unleash a swarm of demons from their backyard after digging a big hole in the ground. The Gate hit theaters in the US on May 15, 1987. It came in second during its opening weekend, raking in $4.3 million. By the time it wrapped up its run, it had made a total of $13.5 million. TV Guide gave it a 3 to 5 star rating, describing it as a surprisingly effective and refreshingly genuine horror flick, though some hardcore fans might find it a bit too soft. The Gate hit theaters in the US on May 15, 1987. It came in second during its opening weekend, raking in $4.3 million. By the time it wrapped up its run, it had made a total of $13.5 million. TV Guide gave it a 3 to 5 star rating, describing it as a surprisingly effective and refreshingly genuine horror flick, though some hardcore fans might find it a bit too soft. Time Out chimed in on the film's dreamlike storyline, suggesting it could have become a cult classic if the creators had let go of trying to connect all the weird pieces. In a look back, Odie Henderson from Slant magazine mentioned, "If you can tap into your inner 12-year-old, The Gate is a fun little escape." He pointed out that family values are a key theme, but it's presented in a way that doesn't feel preachy. Paul Nicolassi from Dread Central reviewed the DVD and gave it a solid 4.55 stars, calling it a must-have movie for all horror fans that's perfect for introducing kids to the genre. Number 9. The Ring. The Ring is a supernatural horror flick from 2002, directed by Gore Verbinski and penned by Aaron Kruger. It features Naomi Watts, Martin Henderson, David Dorfman, and Brian Cox. The story revolves around Rachel Keller, played by Watts, a journalist who stumbles upon a cursed videotape that leads to the death of anyone who watches it exactly 7 days later. This movie is a remake of Hideo Nakata's 1998 film Ring, which itself is based on Koji Suzuki's 1991 novel. The Ring hit theaters in the US on October 18, 2002. It turned out to be a surprise success, prompting DreamWorks to add 700 more theaters to its release. Over in Japan, the film pulled in $8.3 million in just the first 2 weeks. Altogether, The Ring brought in a total of $249 million worldwide. On Ebert and Roper, Richard Roper gave the film a thumbs up, calling it gripping and scary, even though he noted a few minor questions were left unanswered. In contrast, Roger Ebert gave it a thumbs down, finding it boring and borderline ridiculous, and he wasn't a fan of the lengthy, detailed ending. Jeremy Conrad from IGN praised The Ring for its atmospheric setup and cinematography, mentioning that while there are some disturbing images, the film doesn't rely heavily on gore for its scares. Jim Agnew from Film Threat described it as dark, disturbing, and original. While the direction received some accolades, there were critiques about character development. Jonathan Rosenbaum from the Chicago Reader felt the film was an utter waste of Watts, suggesting the script failed to give her a character. On the other hand, William Arnold from the Seattle Post-Intelligencer disagreed, stating she shows intelligence, determination, and resourcefulness throughout. Number 8. Gremlins. Gremlins is a 1984 comedy horror flick directed by Joe Dante, with a script by Chris Columbus. It features actors like Zach Galligan, Phoebe Cates, Hoyt Axton, Polly Holliday, and Francis Lee McCain, while Howie Mandel lends his voice to Gizmo, the adorable Mogwai. The film is inspired by tales of pesky little creatures known as gremlins that were said to cause trouble for the British Royal Air Force during World War II. The plot centers around a young guy named Billy Peltzer, who gets a quirky pet that ends up multiplying into mischievous little monsters, turning his town upside down on Christmas Eve. Gremlins hit North American theaters on June 8, 1984, the same day as Ivan Reitman's Ghostbusters. It came in second at the box office, raking in $12.5 million during its opening weekend, just a bit shy of Ghostbusters by $1.1 million. By the time it wrapped up its run in the US on November 29th, making it the fourth highest grossing film of the year, trailing behind Beverly Hills Cop, Ghostbusters, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. In August 1984, it made its debut in Argentina and Spain, followed by a premiere in West Germany in October. By December, it started showing in Mexico, Australia, and various parts of Europe. Since Gremlins had a global audience, different versions of the film were created to cater to cultural differences. Mandel picked up a few lines like "bright light" in several languages, including German. They also added local music and humor to the foreign language versions. Dante believed this effort played a big role in Gremlins becoming a worldwide hit. Still, some critics were puzzled by the film's summer release in the US, pointing out that it's set during the Christmas season and suggesting it would have been better suited for a holiday release. Roger Ebert gave the film a thumbs up, rating it 3 out of 4 stars. He called it not just fun, but also a clever series of parodies that poked fun at classic film tropes. He pointed out how it captured the essence of mysterious places, like the Chinatown shop, and the overbearing old lady, Mrs. Deagle. Ebert thought the rule about Mogwai not eating after midnight had fairy tale roots, and noted that the ending was a playful nod to classic horror flicks. He also linked Kate's story about her dad to the dark humor of 1950s jokes. Meanwhile, Gene Siskel rated it 3.5 out of 4, calling it a wickedly funny and slightly twisted ride, and praised it as a truly original piece. He felt the film was all about keeping the audience entertained, with a lot of playful energy throughout. Number 7. The Skeleton Key. The Skeleton Key is a supernatural folk horror flick from 2005, directed by Ian Softly, and featuring a cast that includes Kate Hudson, Gina Rowlands, John Hurt, Peter Sarsgaard, and Joy Bryant. The story, penned by Aaron Kruger, revolves around a hospice nurse in New Orleans who starts working at a plantation house in Terrebonne Parish. As she settles in, she gets caught up in a creepy mystery linked to the house, its past residents, and some hoodoo rituals that went down there. The Skeleton Key hit theaters in the US on August 12, 2005, following its earlier debut in the UK on July 29, 2005. It raked in a total of $92 million globally. In its opening weekend in the US, it made $16.1 million, landing at number 2 in the box office rankings, and ultimately brought in $47.9 million in the US overall. The reviews for the movie were pretty mixed overall. Roger Ebert mentioned that the Skeleton Key tries to explain too much while not really explaining enough, and the twist at the end makes more sense the less you think about it. However, he noted that the film's technical skills really shine through. Karina Chocano from the Los Angeles Times had a more positive take, describing the film as tightly woven and suspenseful, keeping viewers guessing until the surprising conclusion, which she felt was worth the leap of faith. She also mentioned that Hudson performed well alongside a strong cast, although Hurt didn't have much to do besides a few dramatic moments, and Sarsgaard was a bit over the top, while Rowlands really nailed her role. Susan King, also from the Los Angeles Times, drew comparisons to classic films like The Uninvited, 1944, and The Innocents, 1961. Number 6. 1408. 1408 is a psychological horror flick from 2007, inspired by Stephen King's 1999 short story of the same title. Directed by Mikael Hofstrom, the screenplay was crafted by Matt Greenberg, Scott Alexander, and Larry Karasowski, featuring performances from John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson. The movie centers around Mike Enslin, a writer who explores places rumored to be haunted. He gets a creepy warning about staying away from room 1408 in a made-up hotel in New York City called the Dolphin. Even though he doesn't really believe in ghosts, he finds himself stuck in the room, where he encounters some really strange and terrifying happenings. 1408 hit theaters in the US on June 22, 2007, thanks to the Weinstein Company and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. It received mostly positive reviews and did well at the box office. During its debut weekend, the movie landed in second place at the box office, raking in $20.6 million across 2,678 theaters. With a production budget of $25 million, 1408 eventually pulled in a total of $132 million, with $71.9 million coming from the US and Canada. James Berardinelli gave the film a solid 3 out of 4 stars, dubbing it the best horror film of the year. He had high praise for John Cusack's role as Mike Enslin, stating, "This is John Cusack's movie to carry, and he has no problem taking it where it needs to go." Berardinelli noted that the film does a great job of reminding audiences what real fear feels like in a theater, rather than just throwing buckets of blood and gore at them. Some critics even claimed it outshines other adaptations of Stephen King's works. Mick LaSalle from the San Francisco Chronicle called it one of the good Stephen King adaptations, highlighting its clever humor and satirical take on human nature, and he found it to be a more genuinely scary movie than most horror films. Number 5. Insidious. Insidious is a supernatural horror flick from 2010, directed and co-edited by James Wan, with a script by Lee Wannell. It features performances from Patrick Wilson, Rose Byrne, and Barbara Hershey. This movie kicks off the Insidious series and is the third in the timeline of the story. The plot follows a married couple whose son mysteriously falls into a coma, turning into a host for various demonic beings in an astral realm. The movie kicked off with $13.3 million, landing it in the number 3 spot at the US box office, trailing behind Hop and Source Code. With a budget of $1.5 million, it has raked in a total of $54 million in the US and $46.1 million overseas, bringing its global earnings to $100.1 million. John Anderson from the Wall Street Journal points out that the real scare in movies comes not from what you see, but from what you imagine could be lurking in the dark. He argues that all the blood and loud noises in horror films often miss the mark, as viewers are more afraid of the unknown. He praises Insidious for creating a chilling experience without relying on gore or cheap tricks. Michael Phillips of the Chicago Tribune adds that director James Wan and writer Lee Wannell have a knack for blending different types of horror, striking a balance between overt scares and subtle tension. Peter Travers from Rolling Stone notes that Insidious stands out as a solid horror flick because it manages to unsettle the audience without resorting to excessive bloodshed. Lastly, Christy Lemire from the Associated Press mentions that Insidious is so engaging that you could enjoy it even with your eyes shut. Number 4. The Sixth Sense. The Sixth Sense is a psychological thriller from 1999, crafted by M. Night Shyamalan. It features Bruce Willis as a child psychologist who has a patient, played by Haley Joel Osment, who insists he can see and communicate with the dead. Released on August 6, 1999, by Buena Vista Pictures under its Hollywood Pictures label, The Sixth Sense was a huge hit with critics. They loved the performances from the cast, especially Bruce Willis, Haley Joel Osment, and Toni Collette, along with the film's eerie atmosphere, direction, and that shocking twist at the end. It snagged 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay for M. Night Shyamalan, as well as nods for Osment and Collette in the supporting categories. This film really put Shyamalan on the map as a top thriller writer and director, showcasing his signature twist endings. It ended up being the second highest grossing film of 1999, raking in about $293 million in the US and $379 million worldwide, just behind Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace. According to Box Office Mojo, it sold more than 57.5 million tickets across the US and Canada. John Anderson from the Los Angeles Times praised the script as clever and declared that Osment delivered the best performance by a child actor this year. Number 3. Signs. Signs is a sci-fi horror flick from 2002, crafted by M. Night Shyamalan, who also produced it alongside Frank Marshall, Kathleen Kennedy, and Sam Mercer. The movie came out under Blinding Edge Pictures and the Kennedy-Josh Marshall Company, hitting theaters through Touchstone Pictures and later on home media via Touchstone Home Entertainment. It features Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix, telling the tale of Graham Hess, a former Episcopal priest who stumbles upon some mysterious crop circles in his cornfield, leading him to uncover the truth about extraterrestrial life. The film dives into themes like faith, family, and the unknown. Signs pulled in a whopping $60.1 million during its opening weekend across 3,264 theaters. When it hit theaters, it had the second-best August opening ever, just behind Rush Hour 2. This was also Mel Gibson's biggest opening weekend to date, surpassing Disney's previous record for a live-action, non-sequel film that wasn't based on any popular source material, which was held by Pearl Harbor. In the end, the movie raked in $227.9 million in the US and $180.2 million internationally, totaling an impressive $408.2 million worldwide. It ended up being Shyamalan's second highest box office hit, outpacing both The Village and Split. Roger Ebert rated the movie a perfect 4 stars, saying, M. Night Shyamalan's Signs showcases a true filmmaker's talent, creating tension effortlessly. When it wraps up, we don't focus on what's unresolved, but rather on the journey we've just taken. By the end, I found myself smiling, realizing that Shyamalan has cleverly avoided a typical payoff. He understands, as we do, that those endings have become pretty dull. Meanwhile, Nell Minow from Common Sense Media gave it 4 out of 5 stars, complimenting the casting and Shyamalan's direction, though she noted that his only shortcoming was not leaving enough to the audience's imagination. Number 2. Jaws. Jaws is a classic thriller from 1975, directed by Steven Spielberg and inspired by Peter Benchley's 1974 novel. The film features Roy Scheider as Martin Brody, the police chief who teams up with a marine biologist, Richard Dreyfuss, and a shark hunter, Robert Shaw, to track down a deadly great white shark that's been terrorizing beachgoers in a summer resort town. Murray Hamilton plays the mayor, while Lorraine Gary takes on the role of Brody's wife. The screenplay was initially drafted by Benchley, with actor-writer Carl Gottlieb stepping in to revise it during filming. Jaws kicked off its run in 409 theaters, raking in a whopping $7 million over its opening weekend and pulling in a total of $21.1 million within the first 10 days, covering its production costs. It hit the $100 million mark in just 59 days across 954 screens. In only 78 days, it surpassed The Godfather to become the highest-grossing film in North America, cruising past that film's $86 million in earnings and making history as the first movie to earn $100 million in U.S. theatrical rentals. It held the top spot as the #1 film in the U.S. for 14 straight weeks, ultimately bringing in $123.1 million in rentals from its initial release. When it was re-released in 1976, and again in the summer of 1979, its total rentals climbed to $133.4 million. The film made its international debut in December 1975, and its overseas success mirrored its domestic triumph. It shattered records in places like Singapore, New Zealand, Japan, Spain, and Mexico. On January 11, 1976, Jaws became the highest-grossing film globally, with rentals hitting $132 million, overtaking The Godfather's $131 million. By the time the third installment came out in 1983, Variety reported that it had racked up worldwide rentals of $270 million. Jaws held the title of the highest-grossing film ever until Star Wars came along 2 years later. Star Wars took the US record from Jaws just 6 months after its release and set a new global benchmark in 1978. Jaws got a lot of love from critics when it came out. Roger Ebert from the Chicago Sun-Times rated it 4 stars, describing it as a sensationally effective action picture, a scary thriller that works all the better because it's populated with characters that have been developed into human beings. It's a film that's as frightening as The Exorcist, and yet it's a nicer kind of fright. Somehow more fun because we're being scared by an outdoor adventure saga instead of a brimstone and vomit devil. A.D. Murphy from Variety also gave a nod to Spielberg's directing chops and called Robert Shaw's performance absolutely magnificent. When Jaws hit theaters, it mostly got great reviews. Roger Ebert from the Chicago Sun-Times gave it 4 stars, saying it was a sensationally effective action picture, a scary thriller that works all the better because it's populated with characters that have been developed into human beings. It's a film that's as frightening as The Exorcist, and yet it's a nicer kind of fright. Somehow more fun because we're being scared by an outdoor adventure saga instead of a brimstone and vomit devil. A.D. Murphy from Variety also praised Spielberg's direction and called Robert Shaw's performance absolutely magnificent. Charles Champlin from the Los Angeles Times wasn't a fan of the film's PG rating. He argued that Jaws is way too graphic for kids and could really upset anyone sensitive, no matter their age. He described it as a rough and exploitative film that relies on shock value to make an impression. On land, he found it dull, poorly staged, and clumsily written. Number 1. Poltergeist. Poltergeist is a supernatural horror flick from 1982, directed by Tobe Hooper and penned by Steven Spielberg, Michael Grace, and Mark Victor, based on a story by Spielberg. The movie features JoBeth Williams, Craig T. Nelson, and Beatrice Straight, with Spielberg and Frank Marshall as producers. It tells the story of a suburban family dealing with evil spirits that kidnap their youngest daughter. Poltergeist originally got slapped with an R rating by the MPAA. However, Steven Spielberg and Tobe Hooper weren't on board with that and managed to get it changed to a PG rating after appealing. Poltergeist hit theaters on June 4, 1982, thanks to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. It turned out to be a big hit, which made it the top-grossing horror flick of 1982 and the 8th highest-grossing film overall that year. Critics really loved the film, and a lot of people see it as a classic in the horror genre, as well as one of the standout movies from 1982. Roger Ebert rated Poltergeist 3 out of 4 stars, saying it's an effective thriller, not just because of the special effects, but because Hooper and Spielberg focused on how the family experiences the bizarre events, rather than letting the effects steal the show. Vincent Canby from the New York Times described it as a marvelously spooky ghost story with extraordinary technical effects that are often eerie and beautiful, but also occasionally vividly gruesome. Andrew Saris in The Village Voice noted that when Carol Ann goes missing, the parents and older siblings unite in a deep familial bond, ready to go to hell and back to rescue her. Meanwhile, Peter Rayner from the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner shared his thoughts as well. Buried within the plot of Poltergeist is a basic, splendid fairy tale scheme. The story of a little girl who puts her parents through the most outrageous tribulation to prove their love for her. Underlying most fairy tales is a common theme: the comforts of family. Virtually all fairy tales begin with a disrupting of the family order, and their conclusion is usually a return to order.